It was a warm Friday evening at La Maison, a fancy, upscale restaurant nestled in the heart of downtown, the kind of place where the chandeliers sparkled like diamonds and every dish looked like a work of art. Among the polished silverware and whispered conversations, Kendra hustled between tables, her black and white uniform crisp but modest. She had been working here for 3 years, balancing trays of delicate hors d'oeuvres and expensive champagne for guests who'd barely glanced at her. Tonight, like most nights, she wore her usual smile, though behind it was a woman juggling 2 jobs and dreams too big for her small apartment. Kendra had learned to be invisible, a silent witness to the lives of the wealthy and privileged. She didn't mind, not really. This job, for all its challenges, had taught her patience and grace. She knew the regulars by their orders, their quirks, and their clipped tones. But tonight, a table near the window caught her eye, the one occupied by 3 women whose laughter rang louder than the soft piano playing in the background. The women were dressed in designer clothes that looked like they had stepped off the pages of a fashion magazine. Their jewelry glinted under the golden lights, and their voices carried a sharp edge of entitlement. They were the kind of customers Kendra dreaded, demanding, dismissive, and impossible to please. As she approached their table with a tray of cocktails, she braced herself, putting on her most professional smile. Finally, one of the women said, without even looking up. Her name was Lauren, and she exuded the kind of confidence that came from never hearing the word no. She waved her hand dismissively as Kendra set the drinks down. "We've been waiting forever. Do you even know what you're doing?" The comment stung, but Kendra's smile didn't falter. "I apologize for the delay, ma'am. Is there anything else I can get for you?" The second woman, Amanda, leaned in with a smirk. "How about some competence? That'd be a start." The third woman, Simone, laughed, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Or maybe a job she's actually good at." Kendra felt her cheeks flush, but she refused to let their words get to her. She nodded politely and stepped back, retreating to the kitchen to catch her breath. Her manager, a wiry man with a perpetually furrowed brow, was already glaring at her. "Table 7's complaining again," he said curtly. "Handle it." "I'm trying," Kendra muttered under her breath, wiping her hands on her apron. She couldn't afford to lose this job, not with her little brother depending on her for school tuition. So she straightened her back, took a deep breath, and went back out, ready to face the storm. But the insults kept coming, each one sharper than the last. They criticized her every move, from the way she poured their wine to the way she cleared their plates. The other diners began to notice, casting sympathetic glances her way, but no one intervened. It was as if the women's wealth and status made them untouchable, their cruelty a form of entertainment. By the time dessert was served, a delicate chocolate souffle, the tension had reached a boiling point. Simone leaned back in her chair, a sly grin spreading across her face. "You know," she said loudly, "people like her don't belong in places like this. It's almost embarrassing." Kendra froze, the tray trembling in her hands. For a moment, the room seemed to go silent, the clinking of glasses and murmured conversations fading into the background. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she could feel tears threatening to well up. But then something shifted. A spark of defiance flickered within her, a quiet but undeniable strength that she had buried for far too long. She set the tray down carefully, her hands steady now. The women were still laughing, oblivious to the fire they had ignited. Kendra took a deep breath, her mind racing. She could walk away, endure the humiliation, and let them win. Or she could do something that would change everything. What happened next was something no one in that restaurant could have predicted. Kendra stood rooted to the spot, the weight of their laughter pressing down on her. The women didn't even seem to notice her hesitation, too wrapped up in their self-satisfied amusement. Around them, the restaurant buzzed quietly, the clinking of forks, and soft murmurs of conversation, carrying on as if nothing out of the ordinary was happening. But for Kendra, it was like time had slowed to a crawl. She felt every emotion bubbling inside her: anger, shame, frustration. But beneath all that was a quiet determination she hadn't felt in years. She thought of her brother, Marcus, at home working on his college applications. He always looked at her with so much admiration, believing she could handle anything. She thought of her late mother, who had worked 2 jobs to make sure Kendra and Marcus had every opportunity she never had. And she thought of the dream she kept locked away in her heart: a bakery of her own, a place where she could finally do what she loved without being belittled or looked down upon. For years, Kendra had pushed those dreams aside, telling herself she needed to be practical, that she couldn't afford to take risks. But tonight, as she stood there with the weight of the women's cruelty hanging in the air, something inside her snapped. She wasn't going to let them define her worth. The women were still laughing when Kendra finally moved. She didn't lash out or make a scene. That wasn't her style. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and calmly walked back toward the kitchen. As she passed by the manager, he shot her a questioning look, but she didn't stop to explain. In the quiet of the back room, she leaned against the counter, trying to steady her breathing. Her reflection stared back at her from the shiny stainless steel surface of the fridge door, tired, frustrated, but alive with something new, something daring. For the next few minutes, Kendra kept herself busy, organizing plates, folding napkins, and pretending everything was normal. But in her mind, a plan was forming. She wasn't sure what it would look like or how it would unfold, but she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't going to leave tonight feeling small. Not again. Meanwhile, at the table by the window, the 3 women were growing impatient. Where did she go? Amanda muttered, glancing toward the kitchen. Did she run off crying or something? Lauren smirked, swirling her wine. Maybe she finally realized she's not cut out for this place. Simone leaned forward, her tone conspiratorial. You know, places like this should be more selective about who they hire. It's all about the image after all. Their laughter rang out again, but this time it caught the attention of a nearby couple. The man, a silver-haired gentleman in a tailored suit, frowned slightly, while his companion, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, looked toward the kitchen with concern. They whispered to each other, clearly uncomfortable with the scene unfolding, but like most people in such situations, they chose not to intervene. Back in the kitchen, Kendra was staring at the clock on the wall. The shift had another 2 hours to go, but the thought of enduring any more of the women's taunts felt unbearable. She considered walking out, but the practical side of her reminded her that she couldn't afford to lose the paycheck. Then, as if on cue, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a message from Marcus, almost done with the essay. Thanks for everything, sis. Couldn't do this without you. Her chest tightened as she read the words. Marcus didn't know the full extent of what she dealt with at work. She never wanted him to worry. He deserved a future free of the struggles they'd grown up with, and she was determined to give him that. But she also knew she couldn't keep letting people like the women at table 7 trample over her. She had to show Marcus, and herself, that standing up for what mattered was just as important as keeping the peace. Kendra took a deep breath and made her way back into the dining area. As she approached the women's table, she noticed that Lauren was tapping her watch dramatically, making sure everyone around them saw her displeasure. "Oh, look," Lauren said loudly as Kendra arrived. She decided to grace us with her presence. Kendra didn't respond right away. Instead, she carefully cleared their dessert plates, her movements calm and deliberate. The women exchanged amused glances, clearly expecting her to apologize or grovel, but instead, Kendra straightened up and looked directly at Lauren. "I appreciate your patience," Kendra said, her voice steady but firm. It's clear you have high expectations, and we aim to meet them, but it's also clear that you've mistaken kindness for weakness. Let me assure you, that's not the case." For a moment, there was stunned silence. Lauren blinked, caught off guard, while Amanda's jaw dropped slightly. Simone raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued but unsure how to respond. Around the restaurant, a few heads turned, the low murmur of conversations quieting as people began to take notice. Lauren recovered quickly, leaning back in her chair with a condescending smile. "Excuse me? Are you seriously trying to lecture us right now?" "I'm not lecturing," Kendra replied, her tone unwavering. "I'm just letting you know that respect is a two-way street. And while I'm here to provide you with excellent service, that doesn't give you the right to treat me, or anyone else, like we're less than you." The room seemed to hold its breath. The silver-haired gentleman at the next table exchanged a glance with his companion, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Across the room, a young couple who had been quietly observing the scene gave each other a nod of approval. Lauren's smile faltered, and for the first time all evening, she seemed at a loss for words. Amanda, however, wasn't ready to back down. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "You're just mad because we're being honest. If you can't handle criticism, maybe you're in the wrong job." Kendra didn't flinch. "There's a difference between criticism and cruelty," she said calmly. "And while you might think your words don't have consequences, they do. Not just for me, but for everyone around you." Before Amanda could fire back, Simone held up a hand. "All right, let's not turn this into a scene," she said, though her tone lacked the bite it had before. It was clear that Kendra's words had struck a nerve, even if Simone wasn't ready to admit it. Kendra gave a polite nod. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," she said simply, before turning and walking away. As she returned to the kitchen, her heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was something else, something stronger. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had taken control of her story, refusing to let anyone else dictate her worth. What she didn't realize was that her actions had set something much bigger in motion, something that would change her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. As Kendra stepped back into the kitchen, the hum of the restaurant's activity seemed distant, like background noise to her racing thoughts. She leaned against the counter, exhaling deeply, and tried to process what had just happened. Part of her was proud. She had stood her ground in a way she never thought she could. But another part of her couldn't help but worry about the fallout. Would the manager call her out? Would those women complain and jeopardize her job? The doubts started creeping in, but she shook them off. No matter what happened next, she wasn't going to regret standing up for herself. In the dining room, however, the atmosphere at table 7 had shifted. Lauren was visibly annoyed, swirling her wine in agitated circles. "Did you hear the nerve of her?" she muttered, glancing around as if expecting someone to agree with her outrage. Amanda, who had been scrolling through her phone to distract herself, looked up and shrugged. "Honestly, Lauren, maybe we did push a little hard. I mean, she's just a waitress." "Exactly," Lauren snapped. "She's just a waitress, and she doesn't get to talk to me like that." Simone, ever the pragmatist, watched the exchange with a measured expression. She wasn't used to people standing up to them, least of all someone in Kendra's position. But she couldn't deny there was something impressive about the way Kendra had handled herself. Still, she wasn't about to admit that out loud, not in front of Lauren. "Let it go," Simone said finally, her tone smooth but firm. She made her little speech. End of story. Lauren huffed, clearly unsatisfied, but she didn't push the issue further. Instead, she motioned for the bill, her mood souring with each passing second. What none of them noticed was the quiet ripple of energy that Kendra's stand had sent through the room. Other diners were exchanging glances, some whispering among themselves. At least a handful of them were subtly glancing toward the kitchen, curious about the waitress who had dared to challenge the status quo. Among them was the silver-haired man who had been sitting with his companion near table 7. His name was Charles, and he was a semi-retired attorney known for his sharp instincts and keen sense of justice. He had been dining at La Maison for years, and while he rarely got involved in the petty dramas of other patrons, tonight felt different. There was something about Kendra's poise and quiet defiance that struck a chord with him. "She handled that with grace," Charles murmured to his companion, a woman named Evelyn. She nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "She did, but I wonder if it'll cost her," Evelyn said softly. "Women like those don't take kindly to being challenged." Charles smiled faintly. "Sometimes the risk is worth it, especially when you're fighting for dignity." Meanwhile, back in the kitchen, Kendra had thrown herself into her work, hoping the business would drown out the swirl of emotions still coursing through her. She cleared plates, restocked utensils, and helped her co-workers with small tasks. She couldn't afford to linger on what had happened. Also, she told herself. "Hey," one of the newer servers, a shy girl named Tanya, whispered as she passed by. "That was really brave, what you said out there." Kendra glanced at her, surprised. "You heard that?" Tanya nodded quickly. "Everyone did, and I just wanted to say thanks. People like them make it so hard sometimes, but you handled it so well." Kendra managed a small smile. "Thanks, Tanya. That means a lot." But as much as the encouragement helped, Kendra couldn't shake the feeling that the night wasn't over yet. And she was right. Lauren, still fuming, had called over the manager, her voice loud enough to draw attention from nearby tables. "I don't know what kind of operation you're running here," she said, her tone icy, "but that waitress of yours just crossed a line. I expect you to deal with her." The manager, who had been on edge all evening, nodded stiffly. "I'll take care of it, ma'am. I apologize for any inconvenience." As soon as Lauren and her friends left, the manager stormed into the kitchen. His face was red, and Kendra knew immediately what was coming. "Kendra," he barked, "my office. Now." She followed him in silence, her heart pounding. Once inside, he shut the door and turned to face her. "What were you thinking?" he demanded. "Do you have any idea who those women are? They're some of our biggest spenders, and now they're threatening to leave bad reviews and take their business elsewhere." Kendra held her ground. "I wasn't trying to cause trouble, but they were out of line, and I wasn't going to let them treat me or anyone else like that." The manager pinched the bridge of his nose, clearly torn. "Look, I get it. They were difficult. But this isn't the kind of place where you can make waves. If you can't handle the job." "I can handle the job," Kendra said firmly. "What I can't handle is being treated like I don't matter." For a moment, the manager said nothing. Finally, he sighed. "Just finish your shift and keep your head down. We'll talk more about this later." Kendra nodded and left the office, her stomach churning. She knew she was walking a fine line, but she also knew she couldn't go back to the way things were. As the night wore on, the tension in the restaurant gradually eased, but Kendra's mind was still racing. She couldn't stop replaying the confrontation in her head, wondering if she had done the right thing. But when her shift finally ended, she was greeted by a surprise she hadn't expected. Charles and Evelyn were waiting near the front door. As Kendra walked out, they approached her with warm smiles. "Excuse me," Charles said, his voice kind. "We wanted to thank you." Kendra blinked, caught off guard. "Thank me? For what?" "For standing up for yourself," Evelyn said. "It's not easy to do, especially in a situation like that. But you showed courage, and it didn't go unnoticed." Kendra felt her cheeks flush. "Thank you. That means a lot." Charles reached into his pocket and handed her a card. "If you ever need help, legal or otherwise, don't hesitate to call." People like those women thrive on power dynamics, but the truth is, they don't have as much power as they think. Kendra took the card, her fingers trembling slightly. "Thank you," she said again, her voice quiet but sincere. As she walked home that night, the card tucked safely in her pocket, Kendra felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead wasn't clear, and she knew there would be more challenges to face. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't alone. Kendra walked home under the glow of the streetlights, her thoughts a jumble of emotions. She clutched Charles's card tightly, the edges digging into her palm as if grounding her. The night had felt like a whirlwind: embarrassment, anger, defiance, and surprisingly, hope. She thought about the silver-haired man and his kind words. It wasn't often that someone outside her small world acknowledged the challenges she faced, let alone offered support. It was a lifeline, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to take it. For now, she just wanted to get home. When she opened the door to her tiny apartment, the familiar scent of home, a mix of lavender air freshener and Marcus's late-night snack experiments, brought her some comfort. Her brother was sprawled on the couch, a laptop balanced on his knees, and the faint sound of keyboard clicks filled the air. He looked up as she walked in, his face lighting up with a smile. "Hey, you're back late," Marcus said, closing his laptop. "Everything okay?" Kendra hesitated for a moment, debating whether to tell him about the incident at the restaurant. Marcus had enough on his plate with school and trying to secure scholarships. The last thing she wanted was to add to his stress. She forced a smile and shrugged. "Just a long night, that's all. How's the essay coming?" Marcus groaned dramatically. "Almost done. Just need to polish it up. But I swear, if I have to write about one more life-changing experience, I'm gonna lose it." Kendra chuckled, her tension easing slightly. "You'll get it done, and it'll be amazing, like everything else you do." Marcus grinned. "You're biased, but I'll take it. You hungry? I saved you some pasta." She shook her head. "I'm good, thanks. Just gonna crash early tonight." As she retreated to her room, the weight of the evening settled on her again. She sat on the edge of her bed, pulling the card from her pocket and staring at it. Charles's name and contact information were printed in elegant, raised letters. Below his name was the phrase, *Advocate for Justice*. It was such a small thing, just a card, but it felt like a spark, a tiny light in the darkness of her struggles. She set it on her bedside table and lay down, willing her mind to quiet so she could sleep. The next morning, the restaurant incident was still fresh in her mind, but Kendra knew she couldn't dwell on it. She had a shift to prepare for, bills to pay, and Marcus to support. As she got ready for work, she checked her phone and saw a message from Tanya. *K, just a heads up, there's been some buzz about last night. People are talking. Kendra's stomach flipped. She couldn't tell if that was good or bad, but either way, it meant the events of the previous evening hadn't been forgotten. She replied with a quick *thanks for letting me know it* and headed out. When she arrived at La Maison, the atmosphere felt different. A few co-workers greeted her with subtle nods, their expressions somewhere between admiration and caution. The manager, however, barely looked at her as he gave his usual pre-shift rundown. She could tell he was still irritated, but he didn't say anything directly to her. As the evening wore on, Kendra tried to focus on her tasks, but the tension was palpable. Every time she passed a table, she felt eyes on her, and whispers seemed to follow her through the dining room. At first, she thought she was imagining it, but then she overheard snippets of conversations. "Is that the one? She really said that? To them. Honestly, good for her." By the time her break rolled around, Kendra felt like she was balancing on a knife's edge. She stepped outside for a breath of fresh air, leaning against the cool brick wall behind the restaurant. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and when she pulled it out, her heart sank. A notification from the restaurant's social media page popped up, showing a new comment. "Terrible experience last night. Staff was rude and unprofessional. Never coming back." It didn't take a genius to figure out who had left the comment. Kendra felt a surge of guilt, wondering if her actions had put the restaurant's reputation and her job in jeopardy. But just as quickly, another thought followed. Why should she feel guilty for standing up for herself? Lost in her thoughts, she didn't notice Tanya stepping outside until she spoke. "You okay?" Kendra jumped slightly, then nodded. "Yeah, just processing, I guess." Tanya hesitated before speaking again. "I saw that comment. But Kendra, people are on your side. You should see the other responses." Curious, Kendra pulled up the post and scrolled through the comments. To her surprise, several people had jumped to her defense. Asterisk maybe if they treated staff with respect, they'd have a better experience. Asterisk. Asterisk Kendra is one of the best servers there. Don't blame her for calling out bad behavior. Asterisk. Asterisk good for her. More people need to stand up to entitled customers. Asterisk. Kendra felt a mix of relief and disbelief. She hadn't expected anyone to take her side, let alone strangers on the internet. But as encouraging as the comments were, they also made her realize just how public the situation had become. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was bigger than one bad night at work. When she went back inside, she noticed Charles and Evelyn at their usual table. Charles gave her a warm smile and a small nod, as if to say, asterisk, keep going, asterisk. It gave her a boost of confidence. But it also reminded her of the card sitting on her bedside table. Should she reach out? Could she really take on something bigger than herself? As the evening wore on, the tension in the air grew heavier. Toward the end of her shift, Kendra saw her manager speaking with a man she didn't recognize, a corporate representative, judging by his sharp suit and clipboard. They glanced in her direction more than once, their expressions unreadable. Her stomach churned. Was this it? Was she about to lose her job? The answer came sooner than she expected. Just as she was about to clock out, the manager called her into his office. The corporate rep was waiting there, his demeanor cool and professional. Kendra took a deep breath and stepped inside, her heart pounding. This felt like the tipping point. Whatever happened next would change everything. Kendra stood in the manager's office, her pulse quickening as the man in the sharp suit adjusted his glasses and flipped through the papers on his clipboard. The room was suffocatingly quiet except for the faint buzz of a fluorescent light overhead. She clenched her hands together, forcing herself to stay calm, even though every nerve in her body screamed at her to run. She couldn't afford to panic, not now. The corporate representative looked up, his gaze cool and assessing. "Kendra, correct?" he asked, his tone neutral. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "I've been briefed on the incident from last night," he continued, setting his clipboard down on the desk. "The customers involved have expressed dissatisfaction with how the situation was handled. They've suggested, quite strongly, that disciplinary action should be taken." Kendra felt the words hit her like a punch to the gut. So this was it. She was about to be fired, and those women were going to walk away feeling vindicated. She braced herself for the blow, already planning how she'd explain this to Marcus when she got home. But then, the man's expression shifted slightly, an almost imperceptible softening. However, he said, his voice quieter now, "I've also reviewed the security footage, spoken to other staff, and even read through some of the social media commentary from our patrons. It's clear that this isn't just about a customer being unhappy. It's about how staff are treated and how we respond to it as a company." Kendra blinked, caught off guard. "I don't understand. Are you saying I'm not in trouble?" The man leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped on the desk. "Not exactly. What I'm saying is that this situation has opened up a conversation we can't ignore. Customers are important, yes, but so is our staff's well-being. From what I've gathered, you handled yourself with dignity under very difficult circumstances." Kendra glanced at her manager, who was standing stiffly in the corner of the room, his expression unreadable. She couldn't tell if he agreed with what was being said or if he was merely tolerating it. "So, what happens now?" Kendra asked cautiously. The corporate rep sat back, considering his words. "For now, you'll continue your duties as usual, but we'll be implementing new guidelines on how to address harassment, whether it comes from customers or coworkers, and I'd like to schedule a meeting with you and a few other team members next week to discuss your experiences and suggestions for improvement." Kendra didn't know what to say. Relief flooded her, but it was tinged with disbelief. She'd spent so much of her life feeling like her voice didn't matter, and now, suddenly, it did. As she left the office, her coworkers' eyes followed her, curious but hesitant to ask what had happened. Tanya caught up with her near the lockers. "Well, what did they say?" "They're not firing me," Kendra said, still processing it herself. "In fact, they want my input on how to make things better." Tanya's face lit up. "Kendra, that's amazing." But before Kendra could respond, a voice interrupted. "Hey, Kendra." She turned to see a young woman standing near the doorway of the restaurant, her expression nervous but determined. She was holding a notepad and pen, and a press badge was clipped to her jacket. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said quickly, "but my name's Rachel, and I'm a journalist with the local paper. I've been hearing about what happened last night, and I think your story could be really important. Would you be willing to talk to me?" Kendra froze, her mind racing. A journalist? The thought of her private life being laid bare for public consumption was terrifying, but at the same time, she couldn't deny the opportunity. If she shared her story, maybe it could help others who were dealing with the same struggles. "I'm not sure," Kendra said finally, glancing around nervously. "I don't want to cause more trouble." Rachel smiled gently. "I understand. But sometimes, shedding light on a situation is the only way to bring real change. Think about it, okay? Here's my card." As Rachel handed her the card, Kendra noticed another figure lingering near the entrance. It was Charles, his silver hair catching the light. He raised a hand in a subtle wave and gave her a look that seemed to say, "Asterisk, you're stronger than you think, asterisk." Kendra's thoughts swirled as she clocked out and headed home. The idea of going public with her story was daunting, but it was also exhilarating. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything was building toward something bigger, something she couldn't quite see yet. When she got home, Marcus was waiting for her, a hopeful look on his face. "So, how'd it go?" Kendra sank into the couch, letting out a deep breath. "It was intense, but I think it might actually lead to something good." Marcus grinned. "See, I told you, you're unstoppable." Kendra smiled, but her mind was already racing ahead. The corporate rep's words, Rachel's offer, Charles's encouragement, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle coming together. But there was still one lingering fear. What if those women came back? What if they found another way to strike back and make her pay for standing up to them? As she drifted off to sleep that night, Kendra couldn't shake the feeling that the storm wasn't over yet. It was just beginning, and she'd have to decide how far she was willing to go to fight for herself and for others like her. The days following the confrontation passed in a blur for Kendra. Between her shifts at the restaurant, the cautious but hopeful meeting with the corporate team, and sleepless nights thinking about Rachel's offer, she felt like she was constantly walking a tightrope. Every time she stepped into the restaurant, she half expected Lauren and her friends to reappear, ready to escalate things even further. But they didn't. Instead, something else happened, something she never saw coming. It started with a quiet buzz on social media. A video had surfaced, shot by one of the diners on the night of the confrontation. It captured the moment. Kendra stood her ground, her voice clear and unwavering, as she told the women that respect was not optional. The video, titled Waitress stands up to entitled customers *, quickly went viral, garnering thousands of views in a matter of hours. Comments flooded in, with people praising Kendra's courage and calling for change in how service industry workers are treated. Kendra found out about the video during her shift when Tanya rushed over, phone in hand, her face glowing with excitement. "Kendra, you're all over the internet," Tanya exclaimed, thrusting the phone toward her. Kendra stared at the screen, her stomach flipping. She watched herself in the video, her heart racing as the scene unfolded. It was surreal to see the moment replayed like that, to hear her own words echo back at her. But what struck her the most were the comments beneath the video. Asterisk, "This woman deserves a medal." Asterisk. Asterisk, "Finally, someone standing up to people like this." Asterisk. Asterisk, "We need more Kendras in the world." Asterisk. It was overwhelming. Part of her wanted to be proud, to embrace the support pouring in from strangers across the country. But another part of her felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't anticipated. What if this brought even more trouble her way? Her manager was quick to address the situation, calling her into his office once again. This time, however, his demeanor was entirely different. "Kendra," he began, clearing his throat, "I've been made aware of the video. And I have to admit, the response has been overwhelmingly positive. People are even calling the restaurant asking to speak with you. It's unprecedented." Kendra frowned, unsure of where this was going. "What does that mean for me?" she asked cautiously. "It means," he said with a tight smile, "that we're in uncharted territory. Corporate wants to use this as an opportunity to show we value our employees. They're drafting a statement now, and they'd like you to be part of it." Kendra felt a flicker of irritation. It wasn't lost on her that the company was suddenly eager to align itself with her actions now that it had become a PR win. Still, if it meant real change could happen, she was willing to play along for now. Later that evening, Rachel, the journalist, reached out again, this time with even more urgency. "Kendra, your story is gaining traction," she said over the phone. "But there's something you need to know. One of the women from that night, Lauren, has been trying to spin her own version of events. She's claiming you were aggressive and unprofessional, and she's threatening legal action." Kendra felt her stomach drop. Legal action? For what? "She hasn't filed anything yet," Rachel assured her, "but she's trying to tarnish your name. I think this is her way of saving face, but it could get messy. You need to be prepared." Kendra hung up the phone, her mind racing. It wasn't enough for Lauren to humiliate her in the moment. Now she wanted to drag her reputation through the mud. But instead of fear, Kendra felt a spark of determination. She wasn't going to let this woman tear her down, not after everything she'd fought for. The next day, Kendra made a decision. She called Charles, the silver-haired lawyer who had offered his help. When she explained the situation, he didn't hesitate. "You've got more support than you realize," he told her. "Let's make sure she knows that." With Charles's guidance, Kendra prepared a statement of her own, addressing the viral video, her experiences, and the importance of standing up against mistreatment. She also shared her story with Rachel, who'd published an article highlighting the broader issues of inequality and disrespect in the service industry. The article struck a chord, sparking discussions on news programs and social media alike. Meanwhile, Lauren's attempts to discredit Kendra began to backfire. The public wasn't buying her version of events, especially not with the video as evidence. People rallied around Kendra, flooding the restaurant with messages of support and even organizing a fundraiser to help her with any legal fees she might face. The breaking point came when Lauren herself was caught in a scandal. A former employee of hers came forward, sharing stories of mistreatment and toxic behavior that mirrored Kendra's experience. The tables had turned, and Lauren's credibility crumbled under the weight of her own actions. For Kendra, it was a bittersweet victory. She hadn't set out to become a symbol of anything, but her stand had sparked something far bigger than herself. As she walked into the restaurant one evening, she was greeted by a round of applause from her co-workers and even some of the customers. Tanya hugged her tightly, whispering, "You did it, Kendra. You really did it." And as Kendra smiled, feeling a sense of pride and relief she hadn't felt in years, she realized something. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been made to feel small, and she wasn't going to stop now. In the days and weeks that followed, Kendra's life shifted in ways she couldn't have imagined. The restaurant, once a source of stress and survival, became a space of cautious optimism. Corporate implemented new policies aimed at protecting staff from harassment, including a hotline for reporting incidents and mandatory training on respect and equity. It wasn't perfect. Kendra knew that real change would take time, but it was a start. Her co-workers treated her differently now, but not in a bad way. There was a newfound respect in their interactions, a quiet acknowledgement of what she had endured, and the courage it took to speak up. Tanya, as always, remained her closest confidant, often joking that Kendra was now the face of justice. The nickname made her laugh, but it also reminded her of the responsibility that had come with her sudden visibility. The fundraiser organized by supporters online surpassed its goal within days. Kendra initially hesitated to accept the money. It felt strange to take help from strangers, but Marcus convinced her otherwise. "You've spent so much of your life giving," he said one evening as they sat together in their tiny living room. "It's okay to let people give back for once." With the funds, she was able to pay off lingering bills and set some aside for Marcus's college expenses. The relief of no longer living paycheck to paycheck was overwhelming, and for the first time in years, Kendra allowed herself to dream about what could come next. Rachel's article continued to gain traction, leading to interviews with news outlets and podcasts. At first, Kendra felt awkward and out of place in front of cameras and microphones, but as she shared her story, she realized how powerful her voice could be. She heard from countless people who related to her experience: servers, retail workers, and even professionals in other fields who had faced similar mistreatment. Each message reminded her that this wasn't just her fight. It was a fight for everyone who had ever been dismissed, overlooked, or treated unfairly. One evening, Charles invited her to a small event at a community center where he volunteered. It was a panel discussion about workers' rights, and he wanted her to share her story. Kendra hesitated at first. Public speaking wasn't exactly her strong suit, but Charles assured her she'd do great. The room was packed that night, filled with people from all walks of life. When it was her turn to speak, Kendra took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked out at the crowd, but then she saw familiar faces: Tanya, Marcus, Charles, all nodding at her with encouragement. "I never thought I'd be standing here," she began, her voice steadying as she spoke. "For so long, I believed my voice didn't matter. I believed that standing up for myself would only lead to more pain, more struggle. But I was wrong." She went on to recount her journey, from that fateful night at the restaurant to the outpouring of support that had followed. She spoke about the importance of respect, not just in the workplace, but in every interaction. By the time she finished, the room erupted into applause, and Kendra felt a sense of pride she hadn't known before. After the event, people approached her with kind words and questions, eager to learn more about how they could make a difference in their own workplaces and communities. It was humbling, but it also sparked something in her, a desire to keep going, to keep using her voice to create change. Back at the restaurant, life slowly returned to normal, though it wasn't quite the same as before. Kendra noticed subtle changes in how customers treated the staff, as if the viral video had reminded people to think twice before lashing out at those who served them. There were still difficult days, of course. Rude customers and long hours didn't disappear overnight, but Kendra faced them with a renewed sense of purpose. One afternoon, as she finished her shift, a familiar face walked into the restaurant. It was Evelyn, the quieter of the two women from that infamous night. She looked hesitant, almost nervous, as she approached Kendra near the hostess stand. "Kendra," Evelyn began, her voice soft, "I don't know if you remember me." "I remember," Kendra replied evenly, unsure of where this was going. Evelyn swallowed hard, then continued, I wanted to apologize. For everything. I should have spoken up that night, but I didn't. And I've regretted it ever since." Kendra studied her for a moment, searching for any hint of insincerity. But Evelyn's eyes were filled with something Kendra hadn't expected, shame and genuine remorse. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Evelyn added, her voice breaking slightly, "about how I've treated people, how I've let others' behavior influence mine. And I'm sorry. Truly." Kendra nodded slowly, her expression softening. "Thank you for saying that," she said finally. "It means a lot." Evelyn smiled faintly, then left as quietly as she'd come. Kendra stood there for a moment, reflecting on how far she'd come, not just in the past few weeks, but in her life. She realized that while she couldn't change the past, she had the power to shape her future, and that was enough. As the sun set that evening, Kendra walked home feeling lighter than she had in years. Marcus was waiting for her, a stack of college acceptance letters spread across the coffee table. They laughed and celebrated together, talking about all the possibilities that lay ahead. In the quiet moments before bed, Kendra thought about everything she had endured and overcome. The humiliation, the fear, the fight for her voice. It had all led her to this point. And while the journey hadn't been easy, it had shown her the strength she didn't know she had. She placed Charles's card, now slightly worn, in a small box where she kept her most important keepsakes. It wasn't just a reminder of the help he'd offered. It was a symbol of the many people who had stood by her side when she needed it most. Kendra lay down, a small smile on her face as she closed her eyes. The world wasn't perfect, but for the first time in a long time, it felt full of possibilities. And she knew, deep down, that she was ready for whatever came next.